Hi, welcome to Daring Faith. I'm the co-host, Sam Rodriguez, with the one and only Ken Harrison. We have one amazing guest. This is it, Faith and Science, God's Coding. Take it away.
So I read this book, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and it had a huge impact on me. And it was weird as he was going on about time and your perspective within time, and it matters greatly where you are in that time. So if you're one place in the universe, anybody saw the movie Interstellar, which is an awesome movie, with Matthew McConaughey, would get that idea. But it seemed like he was completely arguing for creation, completely, and then he runs away from it at the end of the book, like he can't handle what he's actually saying. And so I really want to talk to you about that because I think there's a debate. I had one person call me and say, if you don't believe in 6 literal days of creation, then you can't be a Christian.
6 24-hour days?
6 24-hour days. And then I remember saying to him, well, 24-hour days according to which perspective? And so when the Bible says there are 6 days, it means what it says. I believe that. But I also believe that where you are from what I've read in this book, now I'm an English lit grad, so all I can do is
sorry to hear that, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
sorry. Jeffrey
I'm
Chaucer.
actually even sorry to hear that you're a Trekkie, but So that book, I'd love to hear your perspective, Stephen, on time, on 6 days of literal creation and Hawking's theories on that.
Well, absolutely. It's fascinating. He's a fascinating figure, first of all, and one of the really great physicists of the late 20th century and early 21st, and a heroic figure as well because of the way he persisted in his scientific work after being afflicted with ALS, the so-called Lou Gehrig's disease, the motor neuron disorder. And so it happens that when I was a grad student, a PhD student here, I got to attend a lecture series that Hawking presented that turned out to be the basis of the little book, The Brief History of Time, which he published in 1988, which was a monster bestseller. It was, I think they sold something like 10 million copies. Now, the backstory, though, on Hawking is so interesting and why he wrote that book. In the 1960s, he's a PhD student here in Cambridge, where I happen to be today, and he is working on black hole physics. And he understands that a black hole is a place where the force of gravity is so intense and the curvature of space is so tight that even light can't get out. So I got to maybe do just a little bit more backstory on the backstory here. Einstein comes up with a new theory of gravity in the 19-teens. It's called general relativity. And the idea of general relativity is that massive bodies actually curve space, or what Einstein called space-time, such that they create preferred lines of trajectory. So if something is passing by a massive body, it will take a kind of a curved path, reflecting that curvature of space. And a black hole is a place where where the mass is so densely concentrated that space is so tightly curved that nothing can get out, even light. So Hawking is working on that, and then he begins to think about what the astronomers have been telling everybody, which is that the light coming from distant galaxies is being stretched out, and that indicating that those galaxies are moving away from us, like with the Doppler effect, when a train is moving away and the pitch of the sound gets stretched out and it drops. Well, the light is getting stretched out, suggesting that the universe is expanding outward in the forward direction of time. This was first discovered by astronomers in the 19-teens and Hubble's, or in the 1920s, and is associated with the astronomer Edwin Hubble. And so Hawking's thinking about this. The universe is expanding in the forward direction of time. Well, that means that matter is getting more and more diffuse. And if it's getting more and more diffuse, then space is getting more gently curved and less tightly curved. But then he thinks, well, what would have happened if you wind the clock backwards? At any time in the past, the matter of the universe would have been more densely concentrated, and space would have been more tightly curved. And if you go back and back and back and back, eventually you reach a limiting case where the curvature, the matter can't get any more densely compacted, and the curvature of space can't get any more tight, and you reach a point of a limit where the curvature is infinitely tight and the density of matter is also infinite. And that, he realizes, would have marked the beginning of the universe, a creation event. And so in his PhD thesis, which he completes in, I think, 1966, there's a depiction of this event in the little film, A Theory of Everything. The examiners, they nitpick at other chapters, but they get to this chapter where he develops this idea, and they say, "This is brilliant. Congratulations, Dr. Hawking." And in the movie, they show the examiners pushing the thesis back across the table, and now he's Dr. Stephen Hawking. Now, he ends up developing some mathematical proofs of this with other scientists, including one of his PhD examiners named Roger Penrose. And this ends up being called the singularity theorem, and the idea that the universe emerged a finite time ago out of a singular beginning. Later, there was a further proof of this by three other scientists called the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin proof. So now Hawking realizes that if the universe had a definite beginning, then that suggests that whatever caused the universe was not the universe. And if the universe is made of matter, space, time, and energy, then whatever caused the universe to come into existence was not matter and energy. It must be something that was not bound by space and time, and it was immaterial. And that starts sounding an awful lot like what Jews and Christians have typically affirmed when they talk about the concept of God, a transcendent agent that is not bound by time and space, has causal powers, but is immaterial. And so as people begin to think about these discoveries in cosmology and theoretical physics and Hawking and Penrose's singularity theorems, more and more scientists in the 1980s start thinking that these new discoveries are pointing to God. And there were a series of books with titles like God and the Astronomers. And so this forms these new discoveries form the basis for reviving an ancient argument called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And Hawking, by the late 80s, is getting increasingly uncomfortable with that. He is inclined toward atheism or agnosticism. He's personally suffering because of his disease, which probably gives him a lot of understandable questions about what God is doing in his life. And he ends up trying to find a way around his own proof of the beginning. And that's what the little book, A Brief History of Time, is trying to do. But you're right, there's a sense in the book of Hawking arguing with himself.
Let's take what you had said about all that and take these 6 literal days of creation. So Hawking is basically saying that the universe started with a bang, for lack of a better term, right? It was infinitely dense. It explodes into what we now see. And I'd read a paper, and I wish I could recall who it was by. You may know, but it said that from that moment of the bang, the universe was the size of our solar system in 1/100 trillionth of a second. It was that fastly expanding. And it's been, and Hawking argues, it's been exponentially slowing from the beginning of that moment. And he says in The Brief History of Time that at some point, the universe will get so big, it'll just drift apart from each other, or gravity will stop it completely and it'll start to reverse itself. And then he muses, will that mean that we all reverse our lives backwards? We'll all be Benjamin Button. But the universe, no, and I had actually posed this to some scientists, and you'd say, well, if it was 1/100 trillionth of a second, the size of our solar system, then that's way faster than the speed of light, which is okay because we're talking about the entire universe itself expanding. So it's speed of light is the top speed within the universe, but this is the universe itself. However, in this paper, the guy says if you were standing at one point where that bang happened versus if you were somewhere else out there going out, the two perceptions of time are massively, massively different. And he argues you could have the person at the point, God, it being 6 days for him, but for this person out here, it could be billions of years. And again, English Lit grad, no idea. I'm just parroting what I've read. How does that strike you as far as realistic?
Maybe before we get to that, it might be just interesting for your viewers to know what happened with Hawking's theory, because he was a kind of God-obsessed atheist, and he formulated. I love that
statement. That's a great statement.
That's
good. Yeah, God-obsessed atheist.
He and you have to respect him for that. He was obsessed with the big questions, And you get the sense he doesn't want the God hypothesis to be true. And at the same time, he's contributed to it with his singularity theorems, which he's proved. And there are ways of circumventing the singularity theorems. And in fact, that's what he was attempting to do with a new theory of the origin of the universe called quantum cosmology. But interesting, what he ended up doing in his popular book, The Brief History of Time, there's a famous line, "What need then for a creator?" You may have remembered that, and it was trumpeted through the media all over the world. And what Hawking ended up doing was he tried to depict what physicists call space-time with a certain type of equation. And then to solve that equation, he had to convert the equation into imaginary numbers. He had to introduce an imaginary component in order to solve it, to figure out how probable it would be that you'd get one universe rather than another, is roughly what he was trying to do. And when he's done this intermediate when he's converting and the math is in this intermediate stage unsolved, the depiction of the singularity, the beginning in time, evaporates because he's replaced time with the idea of imaginary time, and then the idea of a definite beginning goes away. But when he completes the mathematical transformation and converts back into real numbers, the singularity reemerges. And he acknowledges that. He says the singularity, the beginning, the depiction of the beginning only goes away as a result of this mathematical trick, this mathematical transformation. The thing is that intermediate stage in his math has no application to the real world. It doesn't depict anything in the physical world. And so there's no metaphysical implications of it either. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a beginning. And so Hawking, in The Brief History of Time, kind of talks out of both sides of his mouth. He talks as though he's eliminated the implication of a beginning, but he also acknowledges that he only does that as a result of a mathematical trick that has no physical meaning. In his more technical papers, where he's trying to develop this alternative model of the origin of the universe called quantum cosmology, he can't develop that model without presuming a singularity at the beginning. So he doesn't get rid of the beginning. And moreover, what he ends up depicting is the universe arising out of a prior purely mathematical state. Now, the thing about math is it's conceptual. It isn't material. It only exists in minds. And so what he ends up doing by trying to circumvent the idea of a beginning to the universe and therefore the need for a creator is he introduces the need for a creator through the back door in another way, saying the physical universe comes out of math, out of an idea. And one of the other physicists, also a proponent of quantum cosmology, and the Russian physicist Alexander Vilenkin, has actually reflected on this and said, well, before there was matter, space, time, and energy, what tablet could these mathematical laws have been written on? Math exists in the realm of the mind. Are we therefore saying that the universe emerged from a mind? And so you get to the same theistic conclusion, even when you attempt to circumvent the theistic conclusion of Hawking's original proofs. So it's a really interesting story, I think, of someone who proves something that has clear theistic implications. It seems to point to the need for God as a creator to explain the origin of the universe. He spends 30 years trying to find a way around it. And in the end, he develops a new theory that has the exact same implication. And that's a story I tell in my book. And I thought your listeners would be interested in that. Before we get to the whole question of the days of Genesis.
Let me interject real quickly right there. I make fun of the English lit degree thing a lot, especially now with scientists and math guys. But actually, I do find English lit to be a very, very good degree. And the reason is because you learn to read critically. So you learn, you're always reading to get, what is the author really trying to say? When I read that book, I remember having this overwhelming impression that this guy totally believes in creation. He just can't stand it, and he can't accept it. And that was, I didn't have any background on Hawking at the time, but it was so obvious.
I think he was very conflicted as a scientist and as a philosopher. There's a famous quote that he has about this that's expressing this quantum cosmological idea. He says that the fact that there is a law of gravity shows that the universe can and will create itself from nothing. And our colleague John Lennox at Oxford has responded perceptively to this, and he says, "Wait a minute, that's a flat-out contradiction. The fact that there is a law of gravity, that is a something, shows that the universe can create itself from nothing. Wait, no, if there's a something there, the law of gravity, then it didn't create itself from nothing." And what I've added to that critique is to point out that those laws of gravity that exist prior to the existence of a material universe are purely mathematical. That's a purely mathematical construct that he's talking about. So if his new theory of quantum cosmology is true, it actually implies the need for a prior mind. He's implying that the material universe came out of a mathematical substrate, which is purely conceptual. There must be we know of no ideas that are not held in minds. And so there must have been a mind.
I was in my early 20s at Penn State University and then subsequently at Lehigh when I read Brief History of Time. And even in my naive, immature 20-year-old Sam Rodriguez, I picked up what I call terrific tension. Stephen's struggle. And of course, his personal struggle with infirmity and disease and so forth served as an impetus behind the unbridled skepticism, the agnosticism, if not the soft, I call it soft atheism, because there was a constant struggle. There was a moment of, hey, and then his own personal backlash.
Well, and poor Professor Hawking, in attempting to get away from Christianity, he had a Christian wife, he later had a Christian nurse, he had a close Christian colleague in physics. And so, he was aware of the implications of his own work. And I think he's just an absolutely fascinating figure. Brilliant physicist. I would say his philosophy of science is not very good. And, this kind of contradictory statement that he just made is something that, just from a standpoint of basic logic is obviously flawed. But he's wrestling with these big questions. And in fact, his last book was, I think, called The Big Questions. So, he's a fascinating, heroic, brilliant, conflicted figure all in one. And a lot of what he was conflicted about was the existence of God and the implications of his own work in pointing to the reality of a creator.
For all my millennials and Generation Z fans out there with our Daring Faith podcast, the Big Bang Theory. That's where Stephen really became a reality and a cultural icon in the past 15 years via the Big Bang Theory and Sheldon and so forth, the great discussions around the table, eating Thai food and Chinese food. This is an intentional tease and hook here on this, because we're not going to get to the 6 days of creation. I promise you this last episode will cover that. It's like talking about tension, this fundamentalist sort of evangelical argument, more evangelical and Protestant. The Catholic Church kind of swayed away in some writings and papers and documentation regarding accepting evolutionary design, intelligent design, and so forth. It's more the evangelical Protestant Church. 6 days of creation, literal, yay or nay. We'll get back to that. Ken Harrison, Daring Faith. Let's do one thing together. Let's go change the world.